Jesus. That's a big dong. Now I'm kind of really upset I didn't choose hide, because I bet I could have had some really kinky invisible sex with him. Like, you could probably, like, see... You would probably be able to see, like, Rave's hole, like, expanding and contracting. Hi guys, I just want to take a second to thank all my patrons here who have donated to me. No matter how much they've donated to me, it really means a lot to me. And if you guys want, you can check out my Patreon and help support me continue to make yaoi videos. Thanks guys. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Valentyne Stories Necromancy. In the last episode, we started getting pretty frisky with this twink because we accidentally chose his room. And we have to learn to live with our mistakes. So we have to get with this Shoto whether we like it or not. I don't even remember his name, but let's just move on. After a moment of hesitation, he hastened to look away, his cheeks slightly pink. He was so angry that a nervous twitch made his eyebrow crinkle. Oh, oh, look at us. Look at Rave shirtless. Oh my god, and it needs to stop with that sound effect. Oh no, 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 no! New rule in this room. In the future, when you're not decent, you'll put on a scarf on the door handle. It'll save me from having to suffer such a horror vision. What? Rave's looking pretty good, honestly. Hey, I'll let you know that when you changed last night, I didn't make any comments. Because I was decent. I didn't change in the middle of the room and I checked you weren't looking. Whoa. You are shy like that. It's not about being shy. It's about the etiquette. Fine, fine. I'll put a scarf or something next time. I nicely decided to allow him this victory. His shy damsel show was funny, and I'd rather laugh than be offended. Besides, whatever he could say, I was quite nice to look at. Good confidence. Unlike my grandpa in his bath, now that would be a horror vision. I searched my closet to find what would be the best fit the tunic. I searched my closet to find what would best fit the tunic of my uniform, so that the combination of my clothes and the academy's wouldn't be a total massacre. We have to properly stylize and accessorize before going to class, apparently. I placed my belt around the center of my tunic, played a little with the thin cords of my coat, then turned to Renan with a big smile, triumphant. So, who's the slob now? That's rather impressive indeed. Oh. Thank you. I was so shocked to hear him tell me a compliment, I didn't know what to say. When I saw his lips stretch into his thin smile, I realized that something was wrong. I don't know why I added the word thin. What I mean is, I was expecting you to look like something once your uniform is on, but I was wrong. It's impressive to see that no matter what he's wearing, a peasant is a peasant. Why do I waste my time with you? He could say what he wanted. I felt more elegant than ever. I was even disappointed that my mother wasn't there to see me in this outfit. She had praised my cousins while he came to visit us after entering the Salvatores. His good looks and his charisma had led my mother and aunt to talk about him for months, which made me a little jealous. I would have liked to show her that her son too could be very good looking with nice clothes. What's with your stupid smile? Did you think I was praising you? 'Cause I definitely wasn't. In the end, it was a lot better when he wasn't there. I had finished lunch early enough to be able to wander around until my steps led me to the entrance hall. I went upstairs to be able to look at the stained glass window more closely. The only stained glass that I had the opportunity to see in my life were those of Lule's church, and they were frankly not impressive. The portrayals were pretty, but there was an error during the construction. The artisans made the church so that its windows were oriented north and south, which prevented the sun from crossing them at any time of the day. We were good farmers in Lule, and that was it. I was counting the colors reflected on the wall when a bell rang throughout the school. Jesus. That's a big dong. What is this? My head had turned like a windmill, looking for where this sound could come from. I saw 2 students go towards the corridor of the ground floor, certainly to join their classroom. I hastened to do the same, down the stairs at full speed. Anyway, even if this bell meant something else, it was better for me to get closer to my classroom since I didn't want to be late. I had not been given much information about the class, so I naturally went to the only classroom I... What? Okay, I guess. I mean, would they not... Okay, I mean, I don't know how they run things here. The one I'd been in the day before. I was going to push the door when I saw Renan in the yard. Suspecting that he had a good reason to be there, I went to join him. Is it snowing? The courtyard was a vast field decorated only by a fountain. Everything else was gravel, since the soil was neatly cleaned of all weeds. Being inside the walls of the academy prevented the wind from engulfing it, which made the place pleasantly cool. Renan was leaning against one of the pillars, arms crossed. He watched me come closer, frowning a little more at each step. Do I need to set up a security perimeter outside of the room too? On one side, I want to say no, but on the other, I'm curious to see how you would do it. Nobody will let you put your damn stripes everywhere in the school. Do not underestimate me. When I want something, I always get it. What a bourgeoisie way of thinking. Why are you waiting here? Isn't the room open yet? Why would it be? Do you think we always learn inside? Actually, I'd not asked myself the question, and it only took a fraction of a second for Renan to understand it. He instantly smirked and turned his head from side to side, looking falsely disillusioned. Lord, that's really what you thought? What would be the use of having such a large school if its students used only one room for each year? You should take the time to think before talking, Rave. We have classes all over the school. The classroom you saw yesterday is just one of many. Since Mr. Valence wants to evaluate your abilities before studying anything, we'll start the day here. Outside, no one can break the furniture. Mr. Valence wants to evaluate my... What? I needed to repeat the sentence aloud to catch all the horror. Test me. My teacher wanted to test me. Okay, calm down. He doesn't want to dick you. Don't get too excited. If his tests were the same as those of my mother, I would succeed them easily. Only I doubted that Mr. Valence would ask me to count to 10 without using my fingers, or guess how many apples would be left to a random guy named Nathan if he gave 2 to his friend. He talked about it a little yesterday before you arrived. You would have known if you had been on time. I would have known too if you had taken the trouble to tell me about it last night. There were more important things to discuss. Anyway, it wouldn't have changed anything. It's not in a party that you become a good mage. It's not in a party that you become a good mage? What does that mean? Okay, if you fail your test, knowing that it was going to happen wouldn't have saved you. Did you not notice? I'm nice. I said, if you fail your assessment, to give you some hope. It would have been even nicer not to point it out. Did he say what he meant by test my abilities? You'll see well alone. I'm not going to bother to talk to you about something that Mr. Valence will explain in 5 minutes. Please, Renan, give me at least one clue. I'd like to avoid making a fool of myself. In this case, it would have been better not to set a single foot in the academy. Your presence alone is a joke. I was going to spit one of my most exotic insults when I heard footsteps getting closer. I turned immediately, convinced that Mr. Valence had just joined us and heard our whole conversation. Fortunately, it was only Hyde. He greeted us with a brief nod, then smiled. I think he might be into me. Your cohabitation is better than expected, it seems. What makes you say that?
He barked at him as if Hyde had just uttered the worst insult. Hyde didn't mind. He moved closer to Renan to lean against the same pillar as him, then was happily answered.
You're both in one piece, and you're waiting together for the class to start. I naturally thought you two got along well.
Do not say anything. We do not wait together for classes to start. He's the one who came to see me because he had no idea where this morning's class was happening. I was quiet in my corner and would have preferred to remain this way.
He had no idea where... Wait, didn't you tell him?
Why would I? I'm not his mother. Hyde rolled his eyes. He walked away from Renan as if his foul character was a contagious disease, not even trying to make him admit he was wrong. I couldn't blame him. I too had surrendered once or twice to Renan's bad faith.
Jesus, another big dong.
Once again, a bell? What for?
Renan didn't tell you about that either?
I am not his mother! Since it was the second time he said this, he was a little more aggressive. Hyde let out an annoyed tisk, then resumed.
The bell rings twice. Once a couple of minutes before classes to give us time to get closer to our classrooms, then a second to announce that classes begin.
It's in your interest to be there before the second one rings, otherwise you'll get in trouble, even during the lessons given by other teachers. They sometimes close their eyes if we get there 5 minutes late, but Mr. Valence doesn't like latecomers. If he learns that one of his students doesn't bother getting on time for his colleagues, this idiot is a dead man. It's fine. I don't have to worry about it. The only time I was late, it was someone else's fault. Or I had an excellent reason to be late. Like my grinder hookup was taking a bit too long. Their explanations raised another question. If the second bell announced the beginning of classes, why were only we three waiting for Mr. Valence? Is Carrie late?
It should be an affirmation rather than a question.
The sudden arrival of Mr. Valence almost gave me a heart attack.
He gets surprised at everything. What is wrong with you, Rave?
He had appeared behind the pillar in front of which we had gathered, and a deep, awkward feeling overwhelmed me when I realized we couldn't know how long he had been here without asking. If he had heard our whole conversation, I'd just have to go back to my room, slip under my blanket, and pray to disappear.
What? Rave didn't say anything embarrassing, did he? What? I don't understand. It's not like you're talking about how much you wanted the professor in your hole. I don't... What does Rave think he said? Is everything fine, Mr. Ravier? You're quite pale all of a sudden.
It depends. How long have you been there?
Not long enough to hear anything compromising.
Mr. Valence asked us to go settle in the middle of the yard and took his monocle in his hands to clean it while did so.
Wait. Mr. Valence asked us to go settle in the middle of the yard and took his monocle in his hands to clean it while did so. While we did so?
The silence was one of a cathedral, and everyone was watching with the same attention as if he was giving a sermon. He put his monocle back in place with an elegance that I could only match in my dreams, and then began his lecture.
As I mentioned yesterday, we're going to spend the morning learning about Mr. Rabier's abilities, as well as the progress of...
Wait for me!
What's happening?
Carrie joined us, panting like a dog that hadn't drunk for hours, hands on his lap to catch his breath. After a few very noisy breaths, he lifted his head and gave his brightest smile to our teacher, as if everything was perfectly normal. I was almost impressed. If I had been him, I would have ran in the opposite direction to escape Mr. Valence's death glare, but Carrie didn't seem to mind it in the slightest. Carrie took a seat next to us and even allowed himself to whistle innocently, provoking an ice-cold veil in the eyes of our teacher.
You seem to forget something, Mr. Dejetti.
Huh? Yes. Excuse me, sir, but I was a little disturbed by the arrival of the new student, so I couldn't sleep well last night. I needed a little more sleep than usual, but it was for a good cause. He said that with so much confidence that I found myself believing it, and even felt guilty for having disturbed his daily life to that extent. Mr. Valence continued to fix Carrie in silence, then smiled. He took a step to the side and invited Carrie to join him with a simple nod. I had no idea what it meant, but Carrie seemed to understand. He instantly lost his shining attitude, swallowed hard, then moved forward. Once his student was exactly where he wanted him to be, Mr. Valence resumed to where he was before Carrie got there.
As I was about to say before being interrupted, we will spend the morning learning about Mr. Rabier's abilities to estimate if the level of our classes can be increased or if there is some need to catch up. I would like to take this opportunity to also check the evolution of the students who were here from the start, so I'll test you the same way I did back then. The elements will have to create a bird with their magics. No, the elementals will have to create a bird with their magic. The most imposing possible, and with all the characteristics of a bird.
He had insisted on this last point, looking at Carrie. Hearing the program, several emotions jostled in my head. On one side, I couldn't wait for the other students' magic since I hadn't yet. On the other, I was scared of using mine in front of everyone. Mr. Valence gestured for Carrie to begin. Carrie rolled up his sleeves and extended his hand.
I'll give you damn bird.
Oh, what's happening? Expecting to see something flying, I turned my head to the sky, eager to see my very first real use of magic. However, the promised bird never came. What? Ew, it's like a slug with wings? What is this? It's like some kind of, like a slime from Dragon Quest. Instead, a kind of long, thick form was moving on the ground and trying to move the small wings it had on its back. I needed to twist my neck to see that it was a slug. Renan burst out laughing, his arms wrapped around his belly. Hyde leaned to the side in the same way I did to better look at Carrie's work and watch the thing move forward with some fascination. I was just as hypnotized as him. Slug or not, Carrie's creation was majestic. If Mr. Valence had asked to create a gastropod with our element, Carrie would surely have been the best of us. Unfortunately for him, it was not the case, and our professor loudly sighed. The worst thing was that he didn't even look surprised.
If you spent as much time studying as you do fooling around, you'd have improved a lot.
I really like his side profile. It just looks like he's looking down on us. Ugh, it's kind of hot. I improved! Look at that! Its wings are much bigger than the first time.
Mr. Valence didn't even bother to answer. In any case, he would have had trouble doing it. Renan's laughter had become so loud that we couldn't hear anything else. He managed to calm down. He managed to calm down after several strong breaths and sat up, wiping a tear on the corner of his eye. I saw his cheeks gain color when he realized that all eyes were on him, even those of our teacher. I already told you, Mr. Leroy, to mock the failures of others is a form of contempt which has no place in a school.
Sorry, Mr. Valence. Aw, look at him blushing. We'll make him blush more later.
Carrie let out a small laugh. Huge mistake. Mr. Valence turned so vividly to him that his cloak cut through the air, creating a menacing purple whirlwind. As for reproducing the same mistakes without even learning anything from them, it is a proof of distressing stupidity. Anukai told us they sent their most promising student in exchange for ours. It can only mean two things. 1. Onukai did send their best element, and in this case, the magic of your country is most distressing. Or 2, you're a mediocre student who's wasting a huge potential. Which one of these explanations is right in your opinion?
The second one? Carrie was too proud to admit it aloud that he was a bad student, but he couldn't ignore a direct question from his teacher, so he spat out his answer, being evasive, his fist clenched.
Mr. Leroy, if you will take his place and show us what a serious and competent student is capable of.
Renan stepped forward with a firm step as Carrie took his place beside us. When they met, Renan lifted his chin with a superior air and began to roll up his sleeves with a more than satisfied smile. Once next to Mr. Valence, he removed his right glove and took a deep breath. Unlike Carrie's demonstration, he wasn't instantaneous. Little by little, small drops of water began to meet in the hollow of his hand, forming a ball bigger and bigger. It was when it took the size of a big apple that Renan could form his bird. Renan had not just made a little tit like the ones in the yard, but a huge scrumptious tit that that looked like nothing I knew. His piece began to fly all over our heads, and each of his flapping wings dropped large feather-like drops on our heads and clothes. I couldn't tell if it was a huge attention to detail or if Renan was mocking in a subtle way so that our teacher wouldn't mention it. Still, his performance was one of the most magnificent things I had ever seen. I don't know if it was Carrie's poor performance that made Renan's more impressive than it really was, but my eyes were shining. I was unable to look at anything else, and the disappointment could be read on my face when Renan decided to make it disappear. I felt a wave of panic even more overwhelming than the first I had when the last feather of water disappeared. I was wondering if it wouldn't have been better if I had gone first. Even Carrie's slug was much better than anything I could do. I was sure Mr. Valence would surely get angry at my poor exploits, and maybe even decide that he didn't belong here.
Perfect, Mr. Leroy. You're becoming faster, and although they were useless, the details on the plumage of your bird were particularly pleasant. I'm glad to see that my classes are useful to someone. Mr. Rabier, please go ahead.
Huh? Already? I instinctively turned my head towards Hyde. Since Carrie and Renan had come before me, I thought it was going to be the same for him. That would have left me a few more minutes before I had to show everyone that I was the worst mage on this whole earth. As I did so, Mr. Valence began to smile.
Creating a bird is an exercise for the elemental mages, and Mr. Fisher isn't one. His test will focus on something else.
I looked so lost he gave me some extra information.
You know what the difference between elemental magic and unusual magic is, don't you?
Elemental mages can use wind, water, or fire, depending on which element they control, and the unusual ones, well, they can do something else. A lot of things, in fact. For example, I heard about an unusual mage who can change the color of another person's hair, just like that, by snapping his fingers. It can become green, purple, even red. Really ugly stuff.
It is quite a singular way of defining it, and somewhat incomplete. You're right about the elemental mages, but the unusual mages are a bit more complex. Every magician is born with elemental magic. Some of them, however, choose to sacrifice it in exchange for another power. They become unusual mages. Alright, let's take a look. Magic obtained once a ritual performed can't be known firsthand. It can be much more powerful, but most of the time it happens to be useless, even ridiculous. That's why there aren't many mages willing to give their magic for another one. It's supposed to have an elemental power that than a magic everyone laughs of, or worse, such a useless one its mage will never be remembered? However, it is a process that very few of us dare to execute. We know that we are sacrificing, but we have no idea what we will receive in return. The example you are talking about is a perfect illustration. This person sacrificed an elemental power that would have opened all doors for a gift without any use. It's a waste. Others had a little luck and inherited a more interesting power than the old one. This is the case of Mr. Fisher.
Said Mr. Fisher had listened to his explanation with the least possible attention, preferring to play with his bangs rather than affirming or denying anything. As Mr. Valence had said, he was here because his power was necessarily useful or even essential, so I began to imagine what kind of magic it could be. Maybe he knew how to create explosions, or even create vital things like food or drinks. Maybe he could see the future. As I was deeply thinking, our teacher invited me to take Renan's place next to him. I was so captivated by his unusual magic story that I had forgotten to be stressed, so I walked slowly while still watching Hyde. My dreams faded the moment I stepped next to Mr. Valence. The panic came back in a storm, making my ears buzz to the point where I couldn't hear what was happening around me. My hands were so sweaty they soaked, and a horrible pain in my stomach ached so awful I would have ran to the latrines had my legs agreed to move. I suddenly felt Mr. Valence's hand rest on my shoulder. He wore a gentle smile that managed to soften the buzzing of my ears and allowed me to hear what he had to say.
I would only like to see what you can do, Mr. Rabier. I have no particular expectation. Do your best. That's all I can ask of you, and it doesn't matter if your performance is a failure.
The problem is that I never tried to make anything. I don't even know how to do it.
You can take inspiration from the tits here to create your bird. Look at them and try to reproduce their shape with your magic. It's not more complicated than that. Try making a really fat tit. A really fat tit will get you an excellent score on this exam. And if you still can't do it, close your eyes and try to imagine even bigger tit. Blocking one of your senses will help you focus.
I took his last advice as if it was going to save my life, and I did so immediately. I had hoped to have a revelation by closing my eyes, but I didn't. I was alone with myself, and blocking my vision only allowed me to hear my heart drumming against my chest. It took a deep breath, unconsciously mimicking Renan, and then I had managed to make a squall a little stronger than usual, proof that closing my eyes was still working a little, but no bird was formed at the end of my hand. I lowered it immediately, disappointed. I was sure that if Renan hadn't been reprimanded when he made fun of Carrie, he would have burst out laughing again at my performance. Mr. Valence tapped his finger at the bottom of his chin a few times while staring at my hand. Fortunately for me, he was still smiling.
Well, we have a lot more to do than I thought.
Sorry. I really gave everything.
I do not doubt it. I have a question before deciding how to help you catch up. How long have you been practicing?
Practicing?
Your magic. When did you use it for the first time?
Something stinky. Stinky? Something stinky and a howl of terror came back to my mind the second I thought about this event. Stinky? It was 3 months ago, just before my father told the academy.
And during these 3 months, how many times have you used it?
Maybe about 10 times. I suddenly saw a completely new expression on Valence's face. He was surprised, really surprised. Glancing at my classmates, I saw that everyone had a similar expression. Even Hyde's eyes were open a little wider than usual.
They wouldn't have looked any different if I had revealed to them the most shameful of our family's secrets, and I was almost wondering if it wasn't what I just did. Only 10 times? No, I avoided as much as possible to use it before I got in the capital. You weren't curious to see what you could do? Not really. I didn't get a very interesting element. Not a very interesting element? Decidedly, I will have heard everything today. Wind mages are very popular, Mr. Rabier. In a slave market, you would be the one that all the purses want. Some practitioners would exchange their magic without hesitation to master the same elements you do. I heard Carrie mutter a very discreet, "Not me," that was followed by an authoritative "Hush" from Renan. Obviously, only about a dozen uses to your credit is difficult to realize. The mages of this school have all been at the same level as you. That's why I'm talking about delay and not something else. Anyone who has practiced so little would have trouble creating anything. He gestured for me to return to my place, and Hyde stepped forward without having to ask him to do so. Once next to Renan, I sighed with relief, glad that this test story was behind me. In the end, it was just a bad time to endure, and nobody was upset to see how bad I was. Mr. Valentyne's speech had even succeeded in restoring my confidence in me. I was perhaps not as hopeless as I thought. Once Hyde was next to him, Mr. Valence continued his evaluation. Your turn, Mr. Fisher. Base, Constitution, and Expansion. Hyde nodded while I tried to understand what our teacher had just said. I don't know if it was because a part of my mind was busy deciphering these famous instructions, or if it was due to a kind of optical illusion, but I needed to blink several times to understand that Hyde had just used his magic. Unlike the elemental mages, he had acted noiselessly without movement and even needing to concentrate, which made the discovery of his power all the more impressive. Whoa, what the fuck? Is that what he's doing? Well, this episode's been going on for a while, guys, so I'm gonna end it here, but in the next episode, we'll continue on, and, now I'm kind of really upset I didn't choose Hyde, because I bet I could have had some really kinky, invisible sex with him. Like, you could probably, like, see, you would probably be able to see, like, Rave's whole, like, expanding and contracting, like, what am I talking about? Anyway, bye, guys.